So the topic tonight is winter backcountry safe travel rituals. So this is kind of a catch-all for a lot of different safe travel rituals. And a lot of it is taken directly from our Avi 1 curriculum, and then we've sprinkled in some other things as well. So ideally, this is a good jumping off point if you haven't already taken an Avi 1 course to absorb some of this information, and then it'll come back up probably in Avi 1 as well. But let me go ahead and get started. So who am I? Just like Keith said, I started ski patrolling at Mount Baldy and then moved over to Big Bear, Bear Mountain Snow Summit. And then now, starting this year, actually, I am working at Alpine Meadows Ski Resort next to Squaw Valley up here in Lake Tahoe. So yes, I did sell out and move up north, but my heart truly belongs in the backcountry of SoCal because most of my backcountry skiing experience has been in SoCal and a bit in the Sierras. And like Keith mentioned, I teach outdoor education in California, Oregon, and Washington during my off seasons. So that's who I am, but let's dive a little bit deeper and talk a little bit about what my demographics are, because I think that's important when we talk about safe travel and particularly the human factors. So who am I? What are my demographics? Well, I'm male, I'm white, and I am between the ages of 25 and 35 years old. So basically that puts me in the most dangerous bracket of people who are likely to get caught in an avalanche. So essentially, this last category that I fit into, I think is very accurate. I am a moron. And I think the more time we all spend in and around avalanches and learning about avalanches, we all start to realize that all of us are morons. So if you take nothing else away from this conversation today, we're all morons. But who are you? So I'd like to know a little bit about our demographic here this evening. And I have Keith with some questions to ask. Oh, there we go. A little bit about you. I'm curious where people live as well as where they plan to travel in the backcountry. And Keith, I have no idea how this works, but if we can show all of us what are, oh, perfect. Sharing the poll results. Wonderful. So most of us here live in SoCal, and 12% of us live elsewhere. If you'd like to share where else you live, where we have people tuning in from tonight, go ahead and throw that in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. And then most of us plan to do our winter backcountry travel in SoCal, and then 40% in the Sierra. So I think the big take home from these survey results are that there's a huge culture and a huge backcountry community in Southern California. And I think people tend to write that off sometimes because Southern California is known for like beaches and surfing and warm weather. But as a lot of you likely know, we have a lot of great backcountry skiing in SoCal. So I think that's important to remember and know that there is a really strong community here, and that makes me really happy. In New England, nice. Anyone else from elsewhere around the country or world here? Thank you, David Rowe. Wonderful. You don't have to share. All right, we're gonna keep moving on. Learning goals for this evening. So we're looking to get through this presentation from Germany, but trying to ski in SoCal. Right on, Philip. Awesome. I wish you the best of skiing here in SoCal from Germany. So talking about learning goals, we're gonna walk through some basic habits and rituals of safe travel. We're gonna introduce the use of checklists, which can be really important and increase situational awareness. And we're gonna finish with a quick discussion about communication and situational awareness. All right, so quick question, and go ahead and throw the answer in the chat if you think you have it. What is the most important piece of safety equipment? Nice. Wonderful. We have a very smart, educated crowd. You're absolutely right. It's your brain. Right? You can have the fanciest beacon shovel probe on the market, but if you are not using your brain, those things are absolutely worthless. So in the end, we want to make sure we have our brain with us and that we're using it when we're in the backcountry. All right, so quick reminder, kind of goes without saying, but remember that there is a difference between the resort and the backcountry. On the left here, we've got a beautiful photo of a nice sunny day at Snow Summit, looking over Summit Canyon. In the middle, that's a picture from Bridger Bowl, and that's kind of in a gray area between front country and backcountry because the zone that those people are hiking into is actually beacons required, but inbounds. So kind of in that gray area. And then the picture on the right is some lovely spring skiing in the Sierra backcountry. So I am assuming the reason why all of you are here this evening is because you want to do things more on the right side of the screen. And I'm guessing that people are less inclined to want to do things on the left side of the screen. So we have to remember that there is a difference. And I like to use this analogy to think about skiing in the front country, i.e. the resort, and skiing in the backcountry. And that is driving a car versus flying a fighter jet. So driving a car, very similar to skiing in a resort, right? We can do it by muscle memory. It's fairly easy. There are objective hazards and we're able to know those. And there are not a ton of other hazards that we need to keep in mind. There's not a ton of like gray area stuff that we're trying to think about. But then we get to the backcountry. And moving into the backcountry is like sitting in the pilot seat of an F-35 fighter jet, right? There's way more information that needs to be going into your brain. There's way more things to pay attention to. There's way more things that can hurt you. And generally just a more overwhelming experience, right? Now, fighter pilots don't just hop right from a car into their fighter jet and know exactly how to do everything. They spend lots of time training and lots of time in that experience to learn more and gather more information. And in turn, that makes them a better fighter pilot and increases their situational awareness. So that's why we do things like this evening. That's why we take Avalanche courses, is to increase our knowledge and skill when traveling in the backcountry. All right, so one more quick risk management thing. This is an equation that comes up a lot of times in a lot of different risk management circles in the outdoor world. And that's risk equals probability times consequence. And so if you conceptualize that, you can think about it like, if I have a situation that's like really, really low probability, so maybe the avalanche danger is very, very low today. However, the consequence of being in an avalanche is very, very high. So say super low avalanche danger today, but there is a possibility that we can have huge catastrophic avalanches that are going down to a layer very deep. Or I'm standing on top of a line that goes right into a big choke between rocks, or it goes into a bunch of trees that would absolutely shred me if I get slid, right? Low probability, high consequence, that still equals high risk. And the same goes conversely, if we got super high probability, like we're gonna pop off a bunch of small avalanches today, low consequence, that's still a high risk situation. So it's important to think about this when we're moving into the backcountry, because you can start to identify situations where the consequence might not look very big, but the probability, maybe that's making your risk a lot higher. And then a big qualifier for all of this is exposure. And that's basically your decision to expose yourself to these risks. If I decide that, you know, the avalanche danger is high today and I don't want to go backcountry skiing, I'm going to stay on the couch and watch TV all day, great. I have minimized my risk because I've minimized my exposure. So all of this is encompassed by exposure. Wonderful. Any questions about what I've covered so far? Wonderful. All right. If you got anything, please feel free to throw it in the chat. I'm going to keep moving on. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about essential equipment, because what is safe travel without the right gear and equipment to keep us safe? And I have this little scale Why do we use this term side country? I feel like it's a serious misnomer. Yeah, Tanya, I absolutely agree with you. I think side country it's a very colloquial term, but it can be really dangerous because when you step outside of a resort's boundaries, you are in the backcountry. 100%. It doesn't matter if you are looking at a rope line from 10 feet away. If you are outside a resort, you're in the backcountry. I feel like people use it sometimes, but it definitely can be really a dangerous term. I've heard a lot of people say like, oh yeah, like we were skiing the resort and popped into the side country real quick and then back. It's like, no, you're in the backcountry. You should be using all of your gear. Thank you for bringing that up, Tanya. So we got the scale, right? And I'd like to tell you two stories about two very, very talented instructors that I've worked with in my outdoor ed career. And these are two different things that these two different people would say when we were heading to our trips. So like we pack up all of our things in our backpacks, we load up the van, we get all of our students loaded up, and we pack up the trailer, we hit the road, we're driving the van to the trailhead, about to go on a backpacking trip. And of course, as an instructor doing that, you're thinking in your head that entire drive, okay, do I have everything? Do I have a first aid kit? Do I have a sat phone? Do I have all these medications, right? And I had two different coworkers and they would have very different responses to this stress. The one on the left would be thinking about all this and we'd be discussing if we forgot anything, and they would be like, yeah, you're right, it doesn't matter until it matters. We need to make sure we have all of this stuff. Instructor on the right, we would be stressing a little bit about if we remembered to pack enough pasta or if we have enough fuel for the stove. And this instructor would be like, well, if we don't got it, we don't need it. And basically saying like, we shouldn't stress about it. We've already packed our backpacks. And you know what? If we don't have it, we're going to figure something out. And it's kind of on this scale. And I feel like a lot of times when we go into the backcountry, we can be a little bit more on the right side of the scale because bad things don't happen every time we go into the backcountry. And maybe we carry that inReach with us, or maybe we carry that first aid kit with us, but we don't use it every single time we're in the backcountry. But it's really important to remember the meanings behind these. So on the left, we have all the training, knowledge, and equipment to self-rescue to the best of your ability? Or do we hope everything goes the way that we expect, right? Have we packed minimal equipment and we just hope that nothing bad happens? Or do we have the equipment to do our self-rescue if we need to?
Jake, sorry, I muted. I had to mute all because we had a few.
I saw that. No worries. All right, so I have a quick survey question. Keith, if you got that gear survey question. And I'm just curious, among the group, I think I've talked to a lot of people who either in Avi 1 or just through SoCal Snow about like where their gear situation is. Like, I'm looking to buy a beacon, or I'm looking at like different probes, but I don't know if I have like found the right probe. So I'd like you to just answer in terms of your essential and useful gear. Do you feel like you're super dialed? Like, yep, I backcountry ski every single weekend. I've got all my stuff. I know everything about all my gear. Or are you somewhere elsewhere on that list? Are you feeling like you have what you need? Do you feel like you're still building your kit out? Like, oh, I'm still like looking for a good puffy to bring, things like that. So go ahead and throw your answer in there. And I think it's interesting with these questions to see the spread, because certainly when I was getting into the backcountry, it made me feel a lot less intimidated to know that there were a lot of other people who also were building their kit out or just have their essentials. Right on. So pretty even spread. We got an even amount of people who are super dialed, have what they need, still building their kit out, and then maybe a few people here who are like just starting to build their kit. Awesome. It's great to know kind of where our audience is at in a constant state of building out and improvement. I absolutely agree. Nice. And I think that connects to a lot of other things we talk about in our Avi courses about You know, sometimes it's helpful to learn along with someone who's at your same level. Go out with someone who also is, you know, getting their gear together and finding some safe ways to learn from each other. Nice. Alrighty, so we got this slide. We're going to talk a little bit about ruining my equipment. Nice, Jeff. A little bit about some essential equipment, and I want you to know, number one, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, and number two, this is not a complete list. This is just some things from AV1 that can stimulate maybe some thoughts in your head or some conversation later during our question and answer. So what is some essential equipment that we bring into the backcountry? Well, first of all, we got our map and compass always, right? You all bring a paper map and compass into the backcountry. Wonderful, that's awesome, because our GPS batteries do die, and they will die likely in the worst time. So knowing how to use your map and compass and bringing it can be really great, and it's also super light. Next, an inclinometer. This is something I think everyone should have like in their pocket as they're touring, no matter what. You can use your compass as an inclinometer. Absolutely, yeah. So like I said, not gonna go super detailed into this, but there's lots of, we could talk gear for hours, I'm sure you all know. Anyways, inclinometer, go check it out. There are inclinometer apps that are cool because you can just whip out your phone and use it. But there are also inclinometer units that have an inclinometer, compass on it, things like that. And that, in case you're unaware of that term, is to measure slope angle, to know if we are in terrain that is steep enough to slide. All right, snow pit supplies, that's got a star next to it because my snow pit supplies were very different when I started than now. So I'm just gonna leave that as kind of a nebulous area. If we wanna talk about it, we can later. Airbag pack, same thing, super nebulous, big conversation. Maybe not a thing we want to talk about right now, but if we have time in Q&A, we can do that. Any inclinometers you recommend? Yeah, lots of, thank you. Many compasses have an inclinometer on them. BCA also has like a inclinometer that has like marked on it, like red zone. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Things like that. The app that I use is called Steve's Badass Inclinometer, and it has an inclinometer on it and a compass, and it also shows your GPS coordinates in case you're like freaking out and need to tell SAR where you are. Whoops, wasn't supposed to go there. All right, cool. Next up, the Holy Trinity: beacon, shovel, probe. Those are the three things that are super important to carry for avalanche rescue. Hopefully you never have to use them, but make sure that you have them and that they're in working order. Again, maybe talk later on about this, but one of the avalanche fatalities last week was potentially due to a beacon that was malfunctioning due to corroded terminals. So make sure that your gear is in working order. Super important. All right, first aid kit with personal meds. This is a super important one. Whenever I tour with anyone, I carry my own first aid kit, and I kind of expect my partners to carry their own first aid kit as well. Because if you are buried in an avalanche, then maybe your first aid kit is also buried in an avalanche. So, right, everyone should carry their own. Don't put it in one person's pack and then forget about it. Also, personal meds, EpiPens, inhalers, things like that. I was having a discussion the other day about needing to spend the night out, and a lot of backcountry skiers have been in situations where you end up spending the night out in the backcountry, and having personal meds that are important to you at any time of day can be important. So I have a partner who takes seizure medication in the morning, and he started to carry it with him in his first aid kit in case he has to spend the night, so that he can take it in the morning and he doesn't miss a dose and run into even more trouble. So good risk management right there, things to think about in your first aid kit. Communication, cell phones, know where your cell phones work, and if you are unsure, expect they will not work. Radios, lots of technology in radios now. BCA's got their thing going, lots of other radios. I am a big proponent of bringing radios, even on super short tours, because they can be really useful for communicating in high winds and other types of situations. Yeah, BCA Link radios are great. The new ones have a lot more broadcasting power. So more gear talk. Personal gear, yeah, right? Like I always bring a puffy no matter what. It could be 60 degrees out in the spring, and I have a big puffy in my backpack because that's how I roll. So getting your personal gear dialed in, understanding what you need, all of your own stuff. Food and water, again, a whole nother nebulous conversation. Sometimes I'll bring a stove into the backcountry because it's great to be able to melt snow and have hot drinks after your buddy's thermos runs out. Headlamp, also super important. Doesn't matter if you're just going out for a scan in the morning. Bring your headlamp, and a tip that's been thrown around a ton is store the extra batteries for your headlamp in another headlamp. So you just carry two and you have a backup. Extra clothing to spend the night, right? I always carry my puffy. Make sure you are packing as if you might spend the night, because sometimes that happens. Emergency shelter, also lots of options there, but I personally either carry a small like packable tarp with me or some type of other like retail emergency shelters. They can be really small, packable, shove it into your backpack, and don't worry about it until you need to worry about it. And then at the bottom, we got appropriate travel equipment. And again, this is another catch-all term. What travel equipment is appropriate for you that day is going to be dictated by what you're trying to do that day. Is it a deep day in the winter? Are you going to be skinning? Or has it not snowed in like a month? And are you going to bring your crampons and ice axes out? And that is another thing, just like that fire pilot, that the more time you spend out in the snow and the more familiar you get with those snow conditions, you will start to learn more about what equipment you need. When I was starting out, there were absolutely times where I got out and I did not have the right equipment, and I chose to turn around because that's the smart thing to do instead of try and boot up San Gregorio without crampons and an ice axe. You don't want to be that person. All right. Also, important to remember, do not substitute equipment for knowledge. I'm going to say that one more time. Do not substitute equipment for knowledge. There are great ways to gain more outdoor skills. You are experiencing one right now. But some other options that you can look into, peer mentorship, right? Learning from a peer that knows a lot, or learning with a peer that knows the same amount as you. Both can be very valuable. Lots of programs out there, REI, OB, NOLS, those all have different offerings in terms of winter backcountry travel. There's lots of books. Mountaineering Freedom of the Hills is kind of like a big, it's like the Bible for a lot of mountaineering skills. Lots of other books out there. Practicing in low consequence environments. So if anything, the first thing you should be learning is how to identify low consequence environments so you can go learn in them, and go to a big flat snowfield and bury a beacon with your buddy and try and find it. And then the internet, which I have added 3 stars next to, because I think it goes without saying that learning things on the internet can be dangerous. I realize how ironic that is right now, but we all know what I'm talking about, right? We don't want to be that YouTube mountaineer. And as the old adage goes, the more you know, the less you need. So if you are just starting out into the backcountry and you're finding that you're carrying like 50 pounds of gear, it'll go down. Don't worry. All right, blasted through that. So we're going to jump into kind of the bread and butter and talk a little bit about some safe travel rituals. So we're going to start out with just some like random ones that I kind of cherry picked. The first one is with transceivers, right? When you put it on, you turn it on. That's a habit that I think everyone should have, because it's really, really scary when you or your partner put your beacon on at the trailhead and then you're saying to each other like, oh, it's, we're going to hike on dirt for 5 miles. So why don't we save the battery and turn our beacons on when we get to the snow? I think that's terrible risk management. I think when you put your beacon on, you turn it on, the batteries last a while, and like, it's worth saving your life, wasting a little bit more battery juice. So when you put your beacon on, if it's on your body, it should be beeping no matter what. And then same with airbags. If you own an airbag and you have it with you when you're touring, I own an airbag. I sometimes tour with it. I sometimes don't tour with it. But make sure that you're deploying your trigger when you're in avalanche terrain. Even says it found a new book. Oh yes, great ski guide manual. by Rob. Super cool. Heard a lot of good reviews about it. Thanks, Ethan. Yeah, so if you have your airbag, pop your trigger out when you're in avalanche terrain. And that doesn't just mean when you're skiing down. If you're skinning across a meadow and there's a huge, 40-degree slope above you, I would have my trigger out then. Don't use pull straps. I'd love to survey the crowd. Why do we not use pull straps in backcountry? Throw it in the chat, or someone wants to unmute and give us an answer. Yes, skiers' wrists, safety in a fall. Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to be locked into those sticks. I don't know if anyone, thumb, whatever. Last week, one of the guys was buried with his pull strap, and the rescuer had trouble getting his arm out. Yeah, that's a real concern. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone's ever experienced like the very benign having your ski pole get caught by like a tree branch. It's not fun, and you definitely don't want to be locked into those poles when you are skiing in the backcountry. So don't use your pull straps. Travel one at a time. That's like super huge in avalanche terrain. Travel one at a time. I'll dive more into that in a bit. Don't travel above partners or other parties. That's pretty big when you're skiing, especially when you're skiing in avalanche terrain, like one at a time with your partner. It's pretty rude to ski down and then park yourself right above your partner. Like if your partner gets first tracks and then stops and then waits for you, and you ski down and stop above your partner, say it was just like a soft slab that broke at your feet, now you just washed your partner away. So make sure not to travel above your partner, and then also other parties. If you're in an area where you're concerned about avalanche slopes downhill of you, make sure that you're not traveling like on an avalanche slope where there's a big group of people right below that. And stopping in such a rush. I think that's something we can all just think about. I definitely get into it when I'm in the backcountry. I want to get to the top of the mountain. I want to get tracks. I'm gonna go have fun. But if you're in a rush in the backcountry, you're doing something wrong, because this is not the time to be super, charging hard and going at it. There are times to charge hard, but as long as we take a step back and like stop, think, look around, use our situational awareness. Chat's blowing up right now. All right. Cool. If you own the book Avalanche Essentials, written by Bruce Tremper, this is on page 115, but these are his like 10 commandments of safe travel. And I'm going to go through these and do a quick little discussion about each one of them, but I highly recommend getting that book, Avalanche Essentials. It's by Bruce Tremper. So first commandment is travel one at a time. Just like I said, if you're in avalanche terrain, there's no need for you and your partner or group of people to be all blasting down a slope at once. Go one at a time, watch each other, keep in visual contact, and hopefully you have radios, so if you do lose visual contact or it's too windy to yell, you can still communicate with your group. Have an escape route. That's a big kind of catch-all. You want to have an escape route from your whole tour, right? Like if we tour into this zone and it turns out to be like avalanching left and right, do we have a way to get out? Can we go back out the way we came? Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. So make sure you have your escape route. Never go first. This is a big Tremper-ism. And I'm not gonna go too much into this because I'd love it if people would go and look at this online and read what Bruce has written about it, because he's done a way better job explaining it than I have. But there are tons of voluntary stability testers out there. There are lots of hikers in the Baldy Bowl. There are lots of Boy Scout troops. There are lots of other skiers who would be more than happy to go test the stability of a slope while you watch from your safe snack spot, right? So don't be so concerned about going first. It's okay if you cross someone's tracks. You're still getting great powder. Never trust cornice. Pretty cut and dry, but always remember, never get complacent around a cornice. They break way farther back than you think. And sometimes you might be standing on what you think is safe snow, but actually you're not standing on over any rock, right? Like if this is where the edge of the cliff is and the cornice is way out here, you might feel like the edge of the cliff is farther out than it actually is. Be obsessed with consequences, right? Doesn't matter where you are, when you're in the backcountry, think about what would I do if something went wrong here, and what are the consequences? Thank you, Keith. Also watch out for cornices above you as well. Yeah, some cornices popping off here in Tahoe lately because of our warm weather that we've been having. Yeah, so be obsessed with consequences. When you're standing on top of your line, what would happen if this slid? What would happen if I fell? Particularly in the spring or in SoCal year round, we have a lot of slide for life situations where if you lose an edge or you fall on your skis, you might be ending up at the very bottom of your ski line. So be obsessed with those consequences. Start small and work your way up. So that goes for all of backcountry skiing, right? We want to start small, start low consequence, work our way up. That also counts for like our backcountry days when we're going out, especially if we're going out for the first time in a week or two. We want to start small, check out some smaller slopes, get an idea of what's been going on with the snow, and then work our way up if we're trying to get some bigger goals accomplished that day. Communicate. It is 100% your responsibility to communicate what you have, what you are thinking, and what you have to say to the group. Don't expect people to ask you questions. Don't expect anything from your partners. It's great when they do, but it's your responsibility to communicate what you're thinking and what you're seeing. Bring a belay rope. I think I at first laughed at this like years ago, and then since then I've had like a few experiences where I thought I was just gonna go out for like a mellow tour with a partner, and we end up on like some sort of like 3rd or 4th class rock, and we're like, oh, this, okay, we could probably use some sort of rope. So now I carry 25 feet of like cordelette, like 7mm rope just in my backpack. And it's been super great to like set up a hand line, or to use if you're protecting, you know, someone who might be approaching the edge. Maybe you don't know if there's a cornice there or not. Super helpful to just have a belay rope. I don't carry other stuff, like maybe I carry a carabiner, but it's like 25 feet of rope and your creativity, and that can be really helpful. Use appropriate equipment. We talked about this a little bit before, but yeah, knowing what the appropriate equipment is and using it. And then remember, terrain, terrain, terrain. You have it in your control to go into certain terrain or stay out of certain terrain, and it's all up to you. So remember, that's what you can manage. You can't change the snowpack, you can't change the weather, you can't change the fact that you're a human, but you can change what terrain you go into. And then it's important to remember, just like any habit, these only work if you do them every time, right? If you don't do them every time, then you're not actually doing them. We want to make sure we're keeping these a standard in our backcountry repertoire. Wonderful. I'm going to keep moving on. If you got questions, please save them until the end, because we got a few more slides and it's already 6:40. So quick thing about checklists. I use checklists every single day. They're really helpful. The more you can like have something in front of you to go through as a checklist, the more it takes that effort out of your brain. You're using less effort in your brain to remember what you're trying to remember, and that will then give you more bandwidth in your brain to use for situational awareness, to notice other things that are happening around you. So again, just to blast through this quick checklist, this is like a pre-trip checklist that I would use before I went out on a tour. So partly like the night before and partly the morning of a tour or in the parking lot. So we're looking at current conditions. And again, this is being recorded, so if you want to go back and refer to this, feel free to do that. There's also great checklists online from a bunch of other institutions. We're looking at avalanche activity, we're looking at weather, we're looking at the forecast and snowpack summary, things like that. It's good to go into the backcountry knowing what your avalanche problem is. I think that's pretty paramount to know what you're dealing with that day. To go more into that, take an AV1 course if you haven't already. Route and terrain appropriate for group and conditions, right? Are we going into terrain that is good for all of us? Like, are we all cool with that? And I'll ahead of time talk with my partner or partners and kind of categorize terrain into like closed terrain where it's like, we're never going to go there no matter what today. Standby terrain where it's like, This would be great, and I feel like all of the other things that we've looked at says this terrain would be okay to ski, but we're gonna put it on standby because maybe, I don't know, if we can get there, if we feel comfortable skiing it, maybe we'll add. And then open terrain, stuff that we feel great skiing, probably low angle, super chill, back to the car. Discuss any concerns with the plan, travel and rescue gear, and then of course do your transceiver trek before you head out on the skin track. How much of this information do you think you should discuss with your partner before your tour? 100%. Thank you, Christian. Yeah, all of it, everything. This should be a constant conversation with your partner. You and your partner should just be those two annoying people at the parking lot, constantly talking about conditions. Number two, that I actually took this screenshot from my phone because this is what I keep on my phone as my touring checklist. So as I am touring, I'll refer to this and make sure I'm covering all these bases. Is the terrain consistent with our pre-trip plan? So when we talked about it this morning, are we seeing consistency between what we talked about and what we're experiencing on our tour? Do we see any signs of instability, likelihood and size of an avalanche? That should be something we already talked about, but are continuing to talk about. What are the consequences? Making go, no-go decisions. And if you want to learn more about that, there's a ton of resources about heuristics and kind of the human factor that go into that. But do we have any concerns? Human factor. If we're ever in doubt, we should move to simpler terrain. And then what's our plan for our travel? Are we spacing each other out? Have we identified, maybe we get to a point where we have to cross underneath a steep slope? Where are our safe zones? Where are escape routes? How can we manage that? And I realize this all kind of seems like super intimidating because it's a lot of things on a bullet point list. But when you have this on your phone and you just pull it out on a tour, you can easily be like, oh, awesome, cool. I remembered we're going to space out over here, stuff like that. So it makes it easier. And then post-trip debrief, also a screenshot from my phone where I'll pull this out at the end of a tour and just have a quick conversation with a partner about, did we make any bad decisions today? If we did, we shouldn't be ashamed of them. We should talk about that. Do we manage terrain well? What could we have done better? Did the conditions match the forecast, right? Did we get surprised by anything, basically? If you're getting surprised by things in the backcountry, important to make a note of that. Do we have any concerns for future tours? And do we have any observations to submit to the Avalanche Center? So if you took pictures, if you did a pit, if you got any information, it's really helpful to submit it to Alan and the Avalanche Center because the more data, the better. All right, we're gonna keep moving on. Thanks for hanging in there, folks. Did I mention human factors too? I just want to give like a quick little primer about human factors because it's like this huge topic, but it's something we should always keep in our mind when we're thinking about safe travel. And we can think about like, what's our risk perception and our risk-taking threshold, right? My risk perception, what I'm willing to go into and do in the backcountry might be very different from Keith's or Alan's or Jeff's. Any of my partners, I might have a different risk perception than them, and it's important to talk about that. Yeah, Alan, any info appreciated. Lots of territory to cover, absolutely. Yeah, so talk about that with your partner, see where each other are at, and then know that so when you go into the backcountry, you can meet each other at the same level. Experience, equipment, and training. I'm gonna group these two together. Experience, equipment, training, attitude, physical condition, ability. Be real with yourself about this stuff. This isn't the kind of stuff that you want to lie about or bite off something bigger than you can chew in the backcountry. So be real about your experience, your equipment and training, and be honest with yourself about your attitude, your physical condition, your ability in the backcountry. And then if you want to read more about human factors, look up heuristics and the word facets and Ian McCammon. He's got some great research about that. And facets is a really cool acronym to remember some of our human factors. All right, so we're about to close out this presentation portion of the evening, but I got a quick little thing that comes actually from like Noel's leadership curriculum that I kind of like to add into these presentations because I think it's really important. And at the end of the day, like we're all humans and we're here to be in the backcountry and be better at being in the backcountry. And a big part of that is being a good communicator. So some quick little Knowles things about being a good communicator in group settings. Speak up when it's appropriate. So, right, we're not speaking up all the time and being annoying and adding useless information, but we are speaking up when we feel like it's appropriate to let people know. Maybe I noticed, a cornice fall on some distant ridge as we were skinning up, but my partner didn't notice it. Probably a good thing to be like, hey, did you notice that cornice that like just dump trucked off of that ridge as we were skinning up this morning? Probably a good thing to mention. Help create a positive learning environment, right? Big pet peeve when like you're showing up to a trailhead and there's people who are like judging you, or you're with people who are judging other people like, oh my God, they're skiing, DPS skis, what a lame ski, right? That's not what this is about. This is about you contributing to the backcountry community here. So let's make it a positive learning environment. Let your group know what you expect of them and what they expect of you. Also a big pet peeve of mine, and I think of most people, is going to do anything outdoors and like halfway through it, your partner is like, hey, I have to be home by 3 because I have to take my dog to the masseuse or something, who knows. Right, we don't like that. Make sure you know your expectations of your partners and make sure your partners know your expectations. If you need to leave early that day, let them know ahead of time. Keep people informed as the situation changes, right? Maybe you're having a crappy day or you're feeling bad that day. Let your partners know, keep them informed as that changes. Did you feel better when you got to that ridge, or did you feel like you were gonna throw up? Listen actively, paraphrase and ask questions to clarify. Again, the other side of communication, it's your responsibility to communicate with others and your responsibility to understand others' communication. Have the courage to state what you think, feel, and want. No one wants to be in a group of people traveling the backcountry and feel like they can't voice a concern. So if you feel like you can't voice a concern, that is a concern in its own, and it's important to bring that up to the group. Speak for yourself, use I language. I think we're very familiar with that. And be empathetic during conflicts, right? Conflicts happen, be empathetic, pretty cut and dry. But I think kind of all of these points really are important to take home when we're in the backcountry, because it can be all fun and games, but things can get really scary really fast. And feedback. Sometimes you might need to give your backcountry partners feedback. And I think feedback is really, really important, but it's also really scary to give and to receive feedback. So if you do need to like let your partner know about something, maybe they, skied right above you, put in a big ski cut right above you. It's important to remember to be timely, be growth oriented, be specific about your observations, tell them exactly what you observed. Acknowledge your share of any problem if you had anything to do with it. Be clear about what you'll do next, and then be open to receiving feedback as well. So feedback is a gift. If I'm doing something that's like really unsafe or annoying or unhelpful for the group and no one ever tells me, I'm gonna feel pretty crappy about that. I would much rather my partners let me know what I'm doing wrong so that I can improve that. So really give your partners that gift. And I got a quick question to survey the group. We're pretty much at the end of our presentation, but if you were to think in your own mind, and this can be backcountry skiing related, this can be outdoor related, but I'd like you to think like, what can you do personally to improve your communication with partners in the backcountry? And you can think about it on your own. If you feel so inclined, you can also throw it in the chat. I think it's really important for others to know where we're at. Because a lot of times the problems that like I have with communication is probably the same as all of you. So Patricia says, be a good listener, ask for feedback. Yeah, super great. Speaking up, checklists to go through together, walkies. Yeah. So David, asking for feedback, that's super huge. I think that's great to like ask your partner, hey, you got any feedback from today? Yeah, Tanya, speak up.
Hey, Jake, if you could talk a little bit about, I know on your phone, you have essentially created a series of checklists that you go through, one for the trailhead, one in preparing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
About the checklist on my phone? So
yeah.
I had like 2 screenshots on this presentation that had, let's see if I can get back to them. Yeah, so that had them on there. And these were taken, I believe they were taken from an AAI course at Avalanche, or an Avalanche Institute course that I took. And basically they gave me this card, and it's like a backcountry checklist. And I've seen a bunch of them lately now. There's like a lot of ARI courses and stuff, like they'll give these out. And I just keyed it into my phone because I'd much rather like just refer to my phone than have to carry like a piece of paper or something in the backcountry. And I'll pull these out, like this one I'll pull out during the day, look at it. This one I'll pull out at the car, look at it. And like I said, just super great to keep that situational awareness up, because you're taking all the bandwidth you would spend remembering this stuff and putting it onto a list. Any questions about like those checklists?
Well, Jake, why don't we open it up for general questions? Folks, if you have a question, put it in the chat and we will, Jake will answer them, or somebody else will jump in.
Ethan said, can I see the second one? So I'm going to pull that one up. But yeah, any questions, go ahead and send them my way.
I want to point out to the folks on the call that we've seen. Well, I think the latest number is 15 deaths in 7 days. I don't mean to be a downer here, but the unfortunate part is they're all occurring within typically high avalanche hazard days, and many of them are avalanches that are running much bigger and further than anyone anticipated. So zones and areas in which people thought they were potentially safe in are now, being steamrolled through by very large slides that are covering the entire slide path. The one thing that we see that is in common is kind of a heuristics trap, which is familiarity. A lot of folks do things over and over and over and become familiar with certain terrain, and that terrain creates some false senses of security. And I really want to push for everyone that whenever you go out, treat each individual time that you go out as an individual moment, an individual time with different conditions, different things that are occurring, and you have to actually take all of that into account. Do not, get into this familiar habit where, yeah, I've been in these conditions. I've skied this many, many, many times, these same exact conditions. Probably not the same exact conditions, and yeah, you may have skied it many, many times, but each time you ski it is different.
Yeah, good points, Jeff. Jake Aisling asks, what are your thoughts on solo touring? Hans has already answered this question, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
I saw Hans's answer, and I agree. You have to be 100% right 100% of the time. If I'm being honest, I do go out by myself to go touring, but I have some really strict rules for myself when I go touring by myself. Generally, I'm almost never touring by myself in avalanche terrain. I'm touring somewhere where all the slope angles and connected slope angles are below 30 degrees. Also, I will never really solo tour in a place that I haven't been before with partners. I do like solo touring mainly as a way to look for other places to go. There's lots of really cool stuff up here in Tahoe, and I'll go out and tour up a fire road and go up to a ridge and go look at other stuff and take pictures on my phone and make notes and look at my map and be like, oh yeah, that would be a cool place to go. That would be a cool place to go. And then get down and be like, okay, cool. Now let me talk to my partners, see if they want to go check out, Carpenter Ridge, or go check out some other place around the area. So yes, I do go solo tour. I'm very conservative about it. Starting out, I would say I definitely did not solo tour, and now learning a little bit more about like how to be absolutely conservative. My view on solo touring is the same as going by yourself on a backpacking trip. There's lots of things that can go wrong. It's important to make sure people know your itinerary and have a way to check on you or know when you're supposed to get back. But also know that, if something goes wrong, it's all on you, and things can get really bad really fast. I think I've said that a few times already. So that's my opinion on solo touring.
Thanks, Jake. Christian S. asks, Jake would love you to touch on the human factor a bit more if you feel we have time. Feel like that as of late has been the biggest pitfall lately. I think Jeff covered the heuristic traps, touched on those. Do you have anything to add briefly, Jake?
No, yeah, I think just knowing that as humans, we can make very bad decisions, and we're not super great about integrating large amounts of data and then using that to make a decision. And that kind of connects to the beginning when I put myself in the demographic of a moron, because like we're not great decision makers. And the more we remember that, and honestly, like stay humble in the backcountry, the safer that we can strive to be. We're never going to reach a level of safety. We're never going to be 100% safe. But if we acknowledge that we can't make great decisions, and then we identify tools to help us, like checklists and like reading the avalanche forecast and understanding the terrain that we're in, then we can do a little bit better to curb against our, bad decision-making tendencies as humans. Confirmation bias as well.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Yeah, I won't go into it now, but maybe I'll post it somewhere. There's a great confirmation bias game online. I think New York Times did it.
Keep in mind, folks, we will have a human factors decision-making fireside chat coming up here shortly as well. So stay tuned for that, where we'll get into a lot more detail.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Jake. We appreciate your time tonight. Alan, it's a few minutes before 7 o'clock. What does Mountain Hardwear have for us to raffle off?
Yeah, and thanks, Jake. Great presentation. A lot